Good morning and welcome. Or as Joy Heath Rush of ILTA likes to say, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, because I don't know where you're watching from or what your time is right now. Welcome to ACED's Blog Live. I am George Socia, Senior Vice President at Reveal. Each Friday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern, I host an episode of ACED's Blog Live, where I get a chance now to chat with luminaries in e-discovery and related areas. In a little bit, I'll bring on this week's luminary, but first a couple of things. A logistical note for everyone. There is the ability to post chats. I will be monitoring the chats throughout, interrupting as appropriate to introduce questions or thoughts. So please make it a lively chat so we can have a good discussion. Then, again, before I introduce this week's guest, I'd like to take a moment to pause to remember someone who was one of the quiet geniuses and pioneers in our industry. David Kittrell recently passed away. David, if I understand correctly, wrote the very first e-discovery review tool, probably in the late 1980s or the early 1990s. And he continued from then on to make significant contributions to the e-discovery industry for decades. I've first worked with David starting in 2003. We were working on a project together for a joint client. And I recall being at a meeting out in Seattle in a law firm conference room where three of the walls, a decent sized conference room, three of the walls were floor to ceiling whiteboards. David took the markers and covered those whiteboards from the floor as high up as he could reach with formulas, equations, snippets of code, outlining the structure we ended up using for that and some other matters. The best way to describe what he put together then in today's terminology would be an AI-based data clustering and predictive analytics platform, the likes of which did not hit the marketplace for years to come. David and I launched two startups, neither of which unfortunately went very far. But it would have been very interesting because of what he was trying to architect and the use of applets or servlets rather in AWS and a few other things. He was unique amongst consultants, as far as I know, in that he worked for or worked with as a consultant two of the largest technology companies out there who are direct competitors, and yet they both had him working. Pretty amazing. He hated to speak at conferences or webinars. I roped him into a few. But when I did manage to pull him on, he invariably was the panelist who left the audience with the most to ponder. He is, of course, missed by many. Now I want to bring you someone else who will give you something to ponder. Aaron Cruz is joining us this week as today's guest. Aaron is the Chief Data Analyst Officer at Littler. Aaron, you're going to have to put up with me talking a little bit longer before we get to you. He is one of a small and rarefied group. One of the folks I think of as being part of the e-discovery trifecta, in that Aaron has worked in-house as an e-discovery attorney, notably at Walmart, where he was senior associate general counsel and head of e-discovery. He has worked at an e-discovery provider, where he was general counsel and VP of strategy at TextIQ. And both before and after those, he was at and is again at Littler. Earlier on as a shareholder in e-discovery counsel, and now, as I said, their Chief Data Analytics Officer. And I'm sure I don't even need to explain who and what Littler is. Today's topic, the thing we want to talk about, is artificial intelligence and the use of it in the practice of law, the use of it in litigation. And there are 3 areas we want to go. I'll lay them out, and then we will be up and running. First, Aaron is going to help us figure out what in the world we mean when we talk about AI in this context and help dispel some of the myths. Second, where decision systems can really be valuable. And third, and probably most helpful for many, some concrete examples he can talk about of the use of AI in this context. So Aaron, sorry, too many names here.
It's early.
I have talked, it's early for you. It's not so early for me. But Aaron, I've talked long enough. Let's get you started. Throw up and dispel some myths about AI for us. What in the world are we talking about?
Happy to, and thanks for having me. I'm not sure the term luminary applies for me, but I appreciate it being tacked on. I mean, when it comes to AI, I think, especially in this market, there's a lot of snake oil smoke, kind of whatever you want to call it. And I think that that's true generally, right? It's like a couple of years ago, you saw blockchain attached to everything under the sun. Everything was being built on the blockchain. AI has probably had kind of a longer marketing tail than blockchain has. And when people use the term AI, they really kind of lump a bunch of things in there together. But for me, I think of artificial intelligence as essentially decision systems, right? Things that mimic human decision making in one way or another. And so there are a whole number of examples of them that people run into all the time. I mean, the systems that help serve up, this is something I talk about all the time when I'm asked to talk about this. The systems on Netflix that constantly recommend that I should watch My Little Pony, right? That system is an artificial intelligence tool. It's essentially a clustering and prediction tool for all intents and purposes. It's basically the same functionality as like your spam filter is using. It's the same functionality that's recommending products to you on Amazon or whatever e-marketplace you are shopping on. And then there are a lot of things that really are not kind of AI, right? They're kind of hard coded. Essentially, they're like functions in math, right? If you put in input X, you get output Y kind of stuff. And then there are a lot of pieces in between that that we can kind of talk about. But if you really think about what this is, for all intents and purposes, it's statistics. It's statistical models being run at various levels of depth, and you have these algorithms that are calculating based on what their inputs are. They're just calculating an output, right? And so that at the end of the day, if you really think about that, at least for me, what it does is it reframes how these things should be used. And so one of the things I talk about all the time is that if you and your organization are not really good at analytics, you're not ready to really heavily pursue AI. Like it's kind of a crawl, walk, run sort of scenario. And the walk, right, is really the being strong in the analytics spaces and being able to already leverage and make sense of data in support of business functions. And then when you move to AI, what you're really doing is you're automating that data analysis in one way or another to augment human decision making.
So I'd like to come back to the crawl in a moment, but I got a couple of sort of yes, no, thumbs up, thumbs down questions. AI or not AI in this context?
Sure.
Email threading.
Not AI.
Why not?
Because it's essentially blunt force tooling, right? All you're doing is you're taking all the messages that are aligned to one another and you're just writing a rule. Not AI.
Okay. Concept searching.
Not AI, because human driven, right? You're punching in whatever the search terms are, and then it's essentially tying those together.
How about concept clustering?
Closer, because it's the machine doing it on its own, right? So, sorry, my My phone is, of course, ringing in the middle of that. I apologize.
We couldn't even hear it, so we're good.
The concept clustering, closer probably, because it's an automated first run by the system, right? So you don't have human intervention. You essentially hit go, and the computer stratifies, or the algorithm stratifies your data into chunks based on essentially how it sees the various pieces tying together. Usually that's a system, it's either clustering or vectors or some combination thereof. And so that is going to be significantly closer in my view.
Predictive coding, TAR, or whatever else you want to call it.
Yes, particularly the active learning piece, right? Lots of human intervention there, right? So in fact, if you really think about the continuous active learning version of predictive coding, essentially it's the same as teaching a system to recognize a cat in a YouTube video, right? You're through the process of humans going through and saying yes and no, right? In terms of what's relevant and what's not, or what's on point or what's not, you're essentially annotating. And so what you're doing is you're teaching the algorithm to refine whatever its base level was and improve its throughput. So, you know, there, yes, I mean, that's a quintessential example of something that I would call, machine learning or AI or decision system, or however you want to, whatever title you want to put on that. I don't like the term artificial intelligence, only because I think it's like cloud, right? Cloud is fancy marketing speak for other guys' computer. AI is marketing speak for machine learning or decision systems or whatever else you want to throw at it.
Yeah, a rather snarky definition of AI that I ran across a while back goes something like this. Artificial intelligence is the stuff we either wish or fear computers could do that they don't do today. And as soon as they're able to do something, it's no longer artificial intelligence, it's something else.
Yeah, I like that a lot for a couple of reasons. I mean, the one that I say all the time, right, is these systems are neither artificial nor intelligent, right? They're computers running, like I said, sometimes very complex statistical models, but at the end of the day, they're just running statistics, and they're not intelligent in any way. They're literally spitting out an output that they have quote unquote learned by their inputs, but there's no intelligence behind them at all.
Okay, so one more set of examples. Model libraries or any other type of structure that's built on the same sort of predictive analytic tools that predictive coding is built on?
I would argue yes, largely because, again, most of that is an automated function, right? I mean, the way I think about a lot of these things is what we're doing is we're creating sort of elastic models that allow machines to do at least part of the heavy lifting of what humans used to do in terms of trying to calculate or trying to divide data or trying to understand and synthesize what information is saying. So it's kind of the winnowing function. And if most of that is automated, and if it's automated in such a way that is continually improving through that process, it probably falls in the bucket. And if it's really people either hard coding things in, or if it's essentially just a log of the decisions that people made, then it's not.
So you mentioned winnowing function. Well, what is that?
A winnowing function, like
winnowing. Okay.
Yeah. It's like it's an old farming term.
Winnowing.
Yeah. I believe it's an old farming term.
Yeah, I think so. Yes. So back to what you said earlier about crawl, walk, run. I think probably very few of us who handle lawsuits are ready to run with this artificial intelligence yet. A few of us can walk. Most of us, crawling is all that we can aspire to. So for the people who handle lawsuits, who aspire to crawl, where do they start? What do they do, and how?
I really think, honestly, the answer to that is get comfortable with data. And when I say get comfortable with data, I mean data beyond like email and text messages, right? I think the e-discovery world in particular has been kind of focused on and fascinated on what I would call unstructured communication data for a very long time. for obvious reasons. I mean, it's not an irrational focus or place to look. But the world has kind of moved on in a way. The way I like to describe this, and Danny Regard at IDS is a person I bounce this kind of stuff off of a lot, and Hunter McMahon over there as well. We kind of talk about these things, over cocktails from time to time. And the way I kind of describe this is, data reinforces data, right? If you have data, particularly data that's being generated by systems that are not designed to tell a story, so things like log files and all kinds of stuff, it doesn't lie. And so you can take that data and you can begin to analyze it to figure out what the sequence of events were, what happened. And a lot of times, if you overlay data on top of data on top of data on top of data, you can begin to get a really clear picture of exactly kind of what went on, who did what when, right? And the communication data that we have always kind of focused on in the e-discovery space really is kind of the icing, so to speak, right? It's the window dressing, it's the drapes, it's kind of whatever you want to call it. It's not the fundamental structure.
It sounds like things like marketing data, manufacturing data, information about component parts suppliers, information about customer complaints, all of those types of things. If you could get that content, throw it into that giant AI hopper, turn the crank, and something good comes out at the end, in theory.
Yeah, well, actually, so you don't even have to throw it into an AI hopper, right? And I can give you even a more concrete example than that, because Littler, I mean, we're the largest labor and employment law firm in the world. And I only say that because it reinforces the fact that that's all we do. We do labor and employment, but we do all aspects of it, right? So even stuff that people don't immediately think is necessarily labor and employment, like trade secrets and unfair competition law, right? Particularly litigating those kinds of cases. And trade secret cases and like wage and hour class actions are really great examples of places where you can use analytics, whether that's just people crunching numbers, looking at data, or automated systems that actually start to really take deep looks at this data. You can start to map out what people did and where they went, right? So you can take things like in a wage and hour class action where the allegation is essentially, I worked 11 billion hours. I never got a lunch. I never got a break. I was scheduled so tightly that my 17-hour days, and I was only supposed to work 8, and you only paid me for 6. And so you owe me $35 gajillion, right? And invariably, that's how those things are always pled. But you can today, it is a rare organization where people walk in and touch nothing that leaves electronic footprints or a digital cloud around them, right? And you can collect those electronic footprints, that digital cloud, and start to analyze it to really say which parts of this complaint might be true and which parts are obvious nonsense. So, I mean, just start thinking about it. Think about, not in a COVID world, but actually we could do a COVID world next, but let's think about pre-COVID world, right? You had your car and your phone, both probably have some level of GPS data on them. So I can tell you where you went and what you were doing. You probably parked your car in some version of a parking garage or a parking lot that you may have had to badge swipe into. You probably had to badge swipe into a door, right, to get into a building. Well, those doors and parking lots have logs. You probably logged on to a computer and multiple systems when you did that, right? Well, those all have login logs. And then you were active inside of what I call core systems, the things that you really need to touch in order to do your job. Right. Mm-hmm. And if the allegation is I was working like crazy and whatever, well, I can get a real clear picture of what your day looked like. I might not be able to tell you exactly what you were doing, but I can tell you if you were active. I can tell you when you started and when you stopped, and I can tell you where you were. And that is really, really helpful.
So you've got great data sources available.
Yep.
Where does the AI part fit in with this? I mean, I can take all that data and I can start going through it manually and figure all of that out eventually.
Yep. Yes, but what you can begin to do, right, is you can begin to write programs that analyze the various tranches of data in certain ways to let you see like timelines, for instance, right? Like what did people do when? Just blocking out specific events. And you can write those such that you can dump data in and it's going to spit data out. But then What you can also begin to do is write programs that tie those various analyses together and begin to automatically generate something that is super useful and layered, right? Layered analysis that lawyers in particular can then use to make strategic decisions about what goes on in those cases. What's the, what does the liability potentially look like? How bad is this thing? Is it good or is it not? I mean, we've had cases where the allegation is, our client owes $70 million in damages. And when we look at like the GPS data and all the other things, what we find out is, you know what, they're actually pretty clean. I think that $70 million case, I think the actual liability was something like 30 or 40,000 bucks, which is a radical transition.
Very different. It sounds as if you then want to start to get your hands on these sources of data and put at least some of that into some form of AI system as early as you can in the life of a matter.
Yeah, this makes me less popular than I am already, which is actually a hard thing to believe. But I constantly am ringing you got to get the data early and you got to get to us early, right? And the sooner that you can start laying in these data sets into something that allows you to synthesize them and understand them. And if you really think about the kinds of AI that you're working with today, and we're going to be working with in the very near future, particularly as like spatial computing really comes into its own, what you're going to start to see is these are essentially human decision aiding functions, right? It's like having a little librarian next to you that can essentially synthesize large amounts of information, because people don't do two things well. They don't work for really long periods of time, and they're not able to digest rapidly large amounts of information. But the thing people do really well is they can take, particularly lawyers, they can take synthesized information and look at that and go, okay, now I should do this with that strategically or tactically. And that's really the value proposition here for all of us.
People keep posing questions about the use of artificial intelligence in the world of litigation or any form of technology as a John Henry versus the steam drill debate.
Yeah.
It sounds like you are much more in the camp I am in, which is what we're really talking about is creating a super powerful exoskeleton that the litigators can strap on, making them stronger, faster, et cetera, than they ever could otherwise be.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I probably should have said something. I fall into a camp. I don't believe in the idea of a super intelligent artificial intelligence. I don't believe machines ever become intelligent. I look at what this fundamentally is, right, which is deep statistical analysis, and I look at that and say, how do you make the leap to something that's the cognitive equivalent of a dog, let alone like a human, right? So the idea that HAL is coming, or the Terminator, or any of the kind of Hollywood tropes that sit around this, I don't ever see that happening. And I'm often wrong, but never in doubt. So again, I may very well be off on this, but that's kind of my personal view of the world. And if you think about it like that, then the explanation that you just laid out makes all the sense in the world, right? What these things do is they allow us to take low-level work and automate that, so that we as lawyers, as paralegals, as whoever is involved in the litigation process, we're not doing that low-level work. We're doing the things where we really add value. And the places where legal professionals really add value is in that thought process and the strategy and the analysis of, here are a bunch of facts, and here is what the law says, and those tie together in this way, and therefore risk looks like X, or our ability to resolve this thing looks like Y. That is really the game. And so, yeah, these are little levers, right? If you think about it in like the physics sense, these are levers that allow you to move larger rocks than you would be able to move if you were just using your own muscle power.
So I'm going to finish off with this question. I'm going to ask you to, as we all do, look through cataract eyes into a murky crystal ball and give me a prediction for what all of this is going to look like, AI in litigation, 5 years from now. And
So
no one's going to hold you to this.
Yeah, I was going to say, I will preface my answer with the thing I always say when people ask me to predict the future, which is those that live by crystal balls are destined to eat ground glass. But with that kind of asterisk on it, what I actually see coming is a world where e-discovery professionals are more important than they are today, because we can understand the data, we can help wrangle that data, and we can work directly between lawyers and the teams who are building and using the systems to analyze that data in ways that lots of other people can't, right? The technology underpinnings are there. And here's the important part. I think over the next 5 to even 7 years, you are actually going to see a lot of what we think of as early case assessment, early culling. Those capabilities are going to be infused into native business systems for all kinds of reasons. I think compliance is going to be the real driver on it in lots of ways, around privacy and information governance, and then also like internal investigations and just that kind of stuff. But that's going to be the driver that causes like major market software companies to put sort of that core culling, search, collection, preservation, all of those functionalities are kind of going to sit in a transparent and defensible way inside of systems, so that a lot of what we do today and we think of e-discovery process will be a core automated feature of those functions. And what that means is your sort of decisioning early on about what you're going to get and what you're going to take and what you're going to look at is the more important part. It's not actually the nuts and bolts anymore to make sure that stuff didn't disappear or whatever. It's more the what are we looking at and how does that drive outcome, right? And so it's the fusion of technology to more traditional lawyering that is going to be the thing that e-discovery professionals probably lead the vanguard on.
Allowing the litigators and trial lawyers to get to where they really should have been all along with this, finding and telling the most persuasive story with the data that's available.
Yeah, it's a weird concept, right? Getting back to lawyering. Who would have thought?
I know. Who thought? Well, Aaron, thank you very much for taking time from your day to spend time with us here. For anybody who missed, Aaron Cruz is the Chief Data Analytics Officer at Littler, which, as Aaron was kind to point out to us, is the largest employment law firm in the world. So once again, Aaron, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.